mustard dressing, and the other sugary dressing wasn't so great for me. I mean, one of the biggest problems really while I'm totally paranoid is that really it's an addiction issue. I kind of get triggered and then I want to eat more sweet things and more sweet things, and I have a super hard time stopping. And that's why I don't even do fruit or anything like that, because that's really enough. I mean, in the binge eating days, I would binge eat like 3 pounds of fruit, and that's not healthy, even if it's pure fruit. But there's so much more since I started researching and reading whole books about sugar. There's a whole book, The Case Against Sugar, highly recommendable, lots of solid science. I just feel like, we should all stop or quit. And I know you've had experiences with that, right?
With sugar, yeah. So the main thing I noticed with sugar was I had a huge addiction to soda, diet soda in specific. And I was training to compete for bodybuilding, and I was logging every single macro. But when you log macros, you're logging calories. Sugar-free soda doesn't have calories. So my trainer...
So you feel like, I can have as much of that as I want. That doesn't count.
And I would have 4, 6 plus a day.
6?
Sometimes, yeah.
Like what, 6 cans of Diet Coke?
Yeah. And the sugar-free
I'd rather drink coffee to get that caffeine.
Absolutely. Well, now I've retrained my taste buds so I can only drink black coffee. I can't even do sugar in my coffee because it's too much. It's gross for me.
Yeah.
But what I discovered in a long talk with my trainer is I couldn't lose those last 5 pounds no matter what I did, and I was doing all these things. We finally got down to diet soda, and he had a heart attack when he found out how much diet soda I was drinking. But fast forward, it was just maybe a week later. The 5 pounds were gone, which was amazing, but the thing that really stood out to me the most is I always had headaches, and those disappeared. Wow. I stopped having headaches, and I had like a new clarity. I felt so much better, and that's when I really started to take a look at these sugar-free things and what they were actually doing to my body.
Mm-hmm. So that's interesting because it's an example for the sugar addiction, but you try to substitute with sugar-free things, so you had a lot of the aspartame, and that's usually the thing that is in diet sodas, and we know now that has a ton of really bad side effects. But it also spikes your insulin. I mean, it's not as much as when you have real sugar, but just the sweet taste already triggers this hormone cascade that prepares the body to deal with sugar, and insulin is like the biggest part of that. And then what happens when you don't have real sugar, but you have the sweet taste that is so convincing to the body?
I have to.
Thank you. I know we can't have that.
So is that why I was holding on to those 5 pounds, you think, for so long and working so hard that I couldn't just get rid of them?
Well, the problem with insulin really is that, first of all, it is essential. If we didn't have insulin, we would die, which is why people who have type 1 diabetes really need to supplement it. But we also know that insulin makes you fat. If you talk to endocrinologists, they all know as soon as they give somebody insulin, those people gain weight automatically, instantly. Because what insulin does is nothing but helps the sugar get into the cells faster. So that's great if we want to burn it. But it's around 300 calories that get saved in the muscles, in the liver. Anything over that gets just changed into triglycerides, which is fats, for storage immediately. And it's really easy to get over 300 calories. If you just think about, one favorite dessert, boom, there you go. So the insulin in the long run becomes a huge problem because a lot of cells who are confronted with too much insulin become resistant to it. So then the burning of the sugars doesn't work so much anymore, which actually means that more of the sugar gets transformed into fat. So your fat cells are getting more and more, but nothing gets burned off. The next problem is, of course, if your whole metabolism is used to running on glucose, which most of us are, because most of us were raised to say like, well, you have to have 3 meals and then you have to have snacks in between and your blood sugar levels should never fall too low. Well, if we're eating like this, we always live off glucose and we don't burn any fat. So the whole situation that you're creating is that by spiking the insulin, all the carbs that you had somewhere, even if you weren't consuming sugar, they get transformed into sugar there in your bloodstream. Boom, this gets put into the fat cells because the insulin rises and you can't lose any weight. And because you had this sweet taste and the preparation of high calories in your body, your whole system starts craving more. So that's then the next thing where, you start getting all these low sugar symptoms.
This pretty well.
And I mean, this used to be the case. When I was married, my wife would say like, you probably have to eat something. For me, it was mostly the irritability, or sometimes I would get really fatigued. I would have trouble making decisions. All that has totally gone after I was on keto for a few months, over a year ago. But just being on keto made it possible for my body to start burning fat directly, because the body has to learn to make ketones first. And that is the part that the cells can really use to gain energy when they don't use glucose. This is the most important thing in the brain. So when you have low blood sugar levels and your body doesn't produce enough ketones that you can use them in the brain, then you get headaches, for example. So that's probably where those came from. You have the diet soda, the insulin goes up, then you use up all the glucose in your bloodstream that you had there from eating any kind of carbs or whatever, and then you fall into really low blood sugar, and then the brain reacts to that. That's one thing. With the aspartame and diet sodas particularly, there's a bunch of other things. It's really bad for the microbiome in your gut, which also raises then inflammation, which also causes just, you can have just more inflammation, and that can cause headaches. So there's a bunch of things that are really terrible. The hangry thing stops when either you have been powering through by fasting or you just learn to burn fats. The inflammation is a thing that not only comes when your gut bacteria are totally out of order, it can also happen, speaking of the gut, just when you have more inflammation in the gut, you also get more molecules that are kind of slightly bigger into your bloodstream, just because there is more permeability in the membranes. It usually should just let the nutrients through, but then they can have like whole molecules, for example, of gluten in your bloodstream, and then your immune system reacts to that. So autoimmune diseases get a lot worse when the gut biome is in disorder and when there's inflammation in the gut. And we know that inflammation in general is raised by consumption of sugar. So just having more sugar is going to make inflammation worse. I know that with a lot of people with chronic pain, they all hurt more when they eat more sugar. And didn't you say that about massage clients?
Oh yeah, I can definitely feel the pain tolerance levels when someone is maybe cheating on their diet, not eating very well. I mean, over the beginning of COVID, I experienced it myself. We had the kids around more. I was a little bit more relaxed with eating habits where I'm normally whole foods. I started picking at the chips and cookies and maybe an extra glass of wine, and
Right.
I could feel it. Especially, I get a lot of body work done, and I can tell when my body, the muscles are tight and when there's inflammation, and almost instantly there was a spike in pain and inflammation around my neck and shoulders especially.
Oh yeah.
So
Interesting.
yeah.
I've noticed that so much with chronic pain clients that, they come back after holidays and everything hurts. But my favorite example really was a guy who was so seriously into bodybuilding, like fat percentage around like 4 to 6%, and I mean, and he was always in top form. He wasn't one of those where everything just, is overworked so much, or it's worked in a way that only gets to the superficial muscles. I mean, he was really good at it. He was really good at having everything. And he always felt like he doesn't really need the work. But he came in one time and everything was just like bloated and puffy and hurting, and I mean, that was right after Thanksgiving, and he pretty much just was like, oh, whatever, the family's gonna be happy, I'll have another piece of pie. In his case, the difference was the biggest I've ever noticed, because it was just like, it was a different body completely. So that was really fascinating to me, and I've noticed that often. What I also found really cool, what I just did recent research, is like on the skin, because I just lost like almost 20 pounds, and the exciting thing for being a little bit fatter, honestly, was like my face was fuller, my boobs for the first time in my life were pretty much like standing up. I always felt like I kind of had too much skin, but they're not really filled out, so having all that extra fat was nice. And I was really worried, is everything gonna start sagging? Am I gonna have these jowls like in Basset Hound? Are my boobs gonna hang to my elbows? And they don't. And I was reading a lot about how different diets affect the skin. And sugar particularly totally ruins the elasticity. I have to admit, I forgot what like the molecular chains are that are broken up and like the elastic molecules, but the sugar directly does that. So people who eat less sugar really have way better skin. And then there's the coolest thing, because I do the intermittent fasting, and that kind of leads to what's called autophagy, that you don't have enough to eat pretty much so that your body starts eating itself. But we used to think in the past this is how you lose muscle mass, because you're going to eat like your muscle protein. But the body is really smart about it, actually. And if you've had enough protein in your diet, you're fine. And cells are selected that are getting old or that are not really needed. So there's actually theories out there that a lot of extra loose skin also disappears when people are fasting more, which is just mind-blowing.
Huh, that's really interesting.
Yes, and I mean, I don't know whether I just got used to my face, but I know that about 5 years ago, I started standing in the mirror, in front of the mirror like this, and thinking like, my nose is just hanging down. I don't do that anymore. I don't think that anymore. So either I got used to this face, or maybe it's really gotten a little bit better. But people keep telling me how good my skin is, particularly when I try to talk to women about makeup, because I have no idea how to apply makeup. And they always say, well, you don't need to. So there must be a lot to it.
I know everyone's always shocked when they find out what your age is. So it's always 10 years lower was the estimate.
Okay, so yeah, even if it's totally for vanity reasons, or, if somebody's losing a lot of weight and they're worried about a lot of hanging skin, kind of getting rid of all the sugar and doing a bit of an intermittent fasting protocol, great ideas.
I just saw a show yesterday, Unwell on Netflix. Episode 2 has a whole thing with different research and testimonies on fasting, the pros and the cons. So.
Interesting. Okay, Unwell, episode 2. I
Yes.
gotta check it out. So then, of course, I mean, if we want something sweet, we have to know how to cheat properly. I know that what you like to do is like the natural sweetness, like honey. And I think it's important because in your case, you don't have like this weird addict brain where like, I start, I can't stop. I mean, for me, moderation really sucks.
But not with sweets.
Yeah,
if it's going to be anything, it's going to be, eating a half bag of potato chips on a great blue moon.
Okay. Yeah. Oh well.
But you can have all the sweets.
And you stop at the half bag?
My stomach can't handle any more than that.
That's good. Yeah, that has been useful. I mean, when I do any kind of binges, I notice like it's not the volume that it used to be. Because, that's another thing that I think the fasting has helped with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't feel as pathetic and stupid and miserable. But I mean, that's the thing with addictions. you do things that you don't want to do, literally, because your brain is just like misprogrammed. So I guess it makes sense to just cut out the things that make you act in ways you don't like. But still, here's the cheat sheet that I approve of, and you can do all the natural stuff. Hey, there's stevia on there. Totally natural. Terrible aftertaste.
Yeah, I don't like the aftertaste to any of this.
Which is why the erythritol is so popular, because it really, I mean, they did studies where they were feeding a ton of it to people, and the only thing that might happen is like a little bit of bloating, but a lot less than with other sugar alcohols that are used as alternative sweeteners. And the great thing is that, you know, you can use it similar to sugar. It's not like one of those things where you have to use a tiny bit. You can dose it pretty much like sugar. So that gets just through the body without being processed, because we don't have the enzymes to split it up, which is nice. And that's why it's so popular with all the keto people, and it doesn't raise the insulin. I mean, stevia still does that a little bit. Aspartame does that more than stevia. I've seen those curves in the studies. But the erythritol doesn't do it, and that's why keto people love to do like these sweets. I still think you gotta just sensitize your taste buds. It's just a habit. That's all it is.
Oh yeah.
You just notice what tastes sweet, and you need so much less. I put D-ribose on here because that's a thing that is actually being researched in a lot of cases with chronic pain, fibromyalgia, also chronic fatigue syndrome, things like that. Because what D-ribose does is it helps the mitochondria produce energy more efficiently. And so if you want to boost your energy levels, if you want to get better musculature faster, and you want something that's kind of sweet, it's a different taste, but it is a sugar, but it is actually a sugar that is really good for you.
So it helps with gaining muscle, you said, as well?
Yes, because of the mitochondria.
That sounds like a bodybuilder's dream.
Yes, totally. And that's why a lot of people are using this as a supplement. And I mean, it's kind of silly to use a sugar in like tiny capsules that you take without tasting them. I mean, throw it in your food when you want something sweet instead of throwing just like the shit in there. Yeah. So yeah, totally. So this is the cheat sheet. Of course, you can also do things like honey in small doses. I mean, it is about the dosage that becomes the problem with sugar, and it's all the hidden sugars. So yeah, reading labels, great idea. What's definitely not a good idea is the diet sodas. No. And that's partially because they ruin your sense of taste. It's also because the aspartame is like really terrible. I mean, just look it up, side effects of aspartame. But also when you see the insulin curves, it does raise it. It does create this whole false sense of there's gonna be high calories coming into the body, and then afterwards you get all the cravings. So I mean, it's not a big surprise when you see people with all the diet products in their shopping carts and all the zero fat things in their shopping carts. If they consume a lot of fake sweeteners and they don't get enough fat in their diet, I mean, they eat a ton more just because they're constantly undernourished. So they get too many calories, but they don't get enough nutrition. They certainly don't get enough fat. So their brain is suffering from that already, and the rest of their body that really needs the fats. I mean, talk about skin. So yeah, here we go. Be careful with fruit, especially fruit juices. Better eat the whole thing.
Yeah. And I know for me personally, I'm an all or nothing type of person. So what I did is just detox sugar altogether. I stopped putting sugar in my coffee, and after that was basically like no sugar. This is gonna suck for a few weeks.
Yeah.
And when I tried to reintroduce sugar back, I'm like, yay, I get my milk and sugar in my coffee. It was gross. I couldn't do it anymore. It tasted like syrup. So it retrained my taste buds.
Yeah.
And I think that's now I'm like, nah, you keep the sugars. It's no longer appealing for me.
Sweet. Literally.
Or salty like me.